Chuck Ray, thank you for joining us for Eye on the Issues. You, of course, are the new Secretary of State for the state of Wyoming. First of all, let's begin by talking about your job. You've, of course, been a lawmaker for years. What's the transition been like?
It's been great, Mike, and thank you for having me on today. I was sworn in January 2nd, went straight into the legislative session a week later, and the session just adjourned last Friday. We've been busy in terms of staffing the office, getting our legislative priorities through, and we've been very successful. We had a very successful session. I'm excited to talk with you about that. I was a state legislator for 6 years representing East Casper, and now in the statewide role in the executive branch. And it's been a great 2.5 months.
So for those that don't know actually what a Secretary of State does, could you kind of paint the big picture for us?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The Secretary of State is an office laid out in the state constitution. There's 5 statewide elected officials in Wyoming. Of course, the governor, and then the Secretary of State, the auditor, the state treasurer, and the state superintendent of public instruction. The Secretary of State in the Constitution is also the lieutenant governor of the state of Wyoming. And there are a number of duties that are laid out. One is elections, having oversight over our statewide elections. That is a duty that has been in the Secretary of State's office since territorial days here in Wyoming. Also, our compliance division, which has regulatory oversight over stockbrokers, broker-dealers, and our business division, where we do business filings for the state of Wyoming. And we're in the top 3 in the nation in our business filings and are really a leader in small business creation and startup. It's where people are going to file their LLCs, their businesses. It's across the nation.
Let's dive in and talk about this past legislative session that really just came to an end. Yeah. What was it like for you?
Well, it was very exciting, Mike. We got through the crossover bill, which was our number 1 priority. And it is something that every year I was a member of the state legislature, as a member, we had attempted to do. And I wanted to bring really the office's full efforts into trying to get through this legislative priority, because election integrity is my number 1 priority. It was a key aspect of what I ran on, and protecting the integrity of our primary elections. The crossover bill, the ban on crossover voting, it prevents individuals from crossing over parties during the primary after May 15th or the day before the first day of candidate filing. And that's a great deadline. It's basically a 3-month lockout, which many states have. And this is for individuals crossing parties. It doesn't prevent a new registration if someone has dropped off the rolls or turns 18. It's about individuals crossing from one party to another. And of course, we've seen these abuses, especially in elections last year, where individuals from the Democrat Party cross over into the Republican Party. And it's just really important for election integrity that we get this bill through, and we did. And we took it to the finish line. I'm really proud of our office and our efforts in doing that. The other thing that we got through, and that is awaiting the governor's signature, is a slight reduction in the early voting period, which I think is good, because we had 45 days of early voting. It's a little too long, and really, we want individuals to have full information when they vote. And when you have 6 weeks of early voting, it's difficult for that to happen. So I think we get a little more balance. It's going to drop to 28 days. And I think that's another election integrity measure as well, because the clerks were concerned about security, and many individuals were with those extra 2 weeks in terms of poll watchers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a good balanced approach to that issue that we got through the legislature. There were a couple things that I was hoping to get through that we were not able to, but we're going to keep working on it in terms of expanding voter ID. I was the lead on the voter ID bill that we passed in 2021, and it was a huge part of why I ran for this office after passing that bill as a member of the state legislature. And we had a couple attempts to expand voter ID that were not successful, but we're going to continue working on it.
In what way? How did you want to expand?
Well, a couple things. One was looking at expanding it to absentee ballots. Right now, voter ID applies to in-person voting. And that was one voter ID expansion or clarification that we did get through. There was an interpretation by some county clerks during the last election that if an absentee ballot was requested in person, that a voter ID was not required. Well, the intent on the original legislation was that all voting that had an in-person nexus would require an identification. And so we clarified that loophole. That's the one we got through. Now, the larger expansion on applying voter ID to absentee ballots was not successful. We were also not successful. There were some attempts on clarifying the list of acceptable identification, one in ensuring that expired IDs are not acceptable. That did not go through, and I think it is important that we clarify that it needs to be a current valid ID. And then also removing student IDs off the list of acceptable identification. That was one that when we passed the bill in 2021, I remember very well having engaged in those debates. We were concerned about adding that to the list, but ultimately that did come through in a last minute amendment. And the concern there, right, is that foreign nationals have access to those student IDs, especially at the university. So that's the concern there.
Let's talk for a second, and let's stay with election integrity for a second. Yeah. There's been some talk, not a lot, but some talk in general across the nation about the only way to make sure that an election is secure is to have paper ballots. Do you ever see any states going back to that?
Well, in Wyoming, 22 of our 23 counties do have paper ballots. We, of course, have counting machines. Laramie County has touchscreens, and that is something I've been talking with the county clerk here. I think it is much preferable to have pen to paper ballots, and that is what our 22 of 23 counties have, and I would like to see that be applied to Laramie County as well. A couple other things on the session, Mike, I'd like to mention. Please. On the transparency side, which is very important to me, transparency. The previous Secretary of State, Ed Buchanan, had reversed a longstanding practice of releasing on our voter registration list what's called the voter ID number, which is a personal number that ensures that people aren't double voting. It's assigned to somebody when they register, and it was created with HAVA. And a lot of individuals who go state to state and request voter registry lists that are interested in citizens that are looking to ensure integrity and work with that, they request those lists state to state, and it helps to ensure when there is that voter identification number that there isn't double voting happening, and people aren't registered across jurisdictions with possibly different names or slight variations in the names. And so it was very important that we have this as a transparency measure. And Ed Buchanan had reversed this practice last year, and I think it was done in a way that did not conform with the statute, what the statute required. So we conducted an internal review of the policy once I was sworn in, and we reversed it within 2 weeks. And then the legislature also officially codified that change during the session. So that practice will be in place permanently, and it's an election integrity measure. And the other one that we got through, which is also awaiting action from the governor, is Liz Cheney in the election last year sent out this mass mailing posing as clerks across the state, encouraging people to request an absentee ballot. And it was done in a very dishonest way. And we passed a bill which prevents these absentee ballot request forms from being sent by third parties when they're impersonating somebody. And obviously, if a clerk does it or an election official does it, that's a different matter. But when you have a campaign posing as an election officials, and we see this with the Zuck bucks and the Soros bucks that are being thrown around, where they send out these official absentee ballot request forms, make it look like an official document, and it's really harassment of the voters, and it's an attempt to mess with the system from the outside that is not proper.
As a former lawmaker, obviously you probably pay attention to a lot more bills than the average Secretary of State. Were there other measures that did not get through this session that you had hoped would, and if so, what were they?
Yeah. Well, the property tax issue is near and dear to my heart, getting a control on these outrageous property tax increases. Representing East Casper, I mean, we had situations up on the mountain where you had 1,900% year-to-year increases. It was just outrageous, and it continues to be. And we've been looking at reforming the system in a conservative way for some time. I was on the Revenue Committee, specifically asked to be on that the last 2 years as a legislator before I left office here at the end of December. And I was very disappointed we were not able to get through an exemption. There was a bill to exempt out the first, there was one proposal for the first $50,000 of somebody's assessment, and then another one for $100,000. I think both of those would have been great, and that failed over in the Senate. And then there was also an attempt to place in the Constitution language clearly allowing for caps. And that's the long-term fix here, is to put a year-to-year cap on these increases. And there's a whole debate on whether it's constitutional or not. I think that just to sort of transcend that debate, you put it in there and then you come back in 2025 and you fix it after it's in the Constitution. And I'm all for a statutory fix as well. I attempted to do that twice, but every time we do that, individuals that didn't want to see this through hid behind the constitutional argument, as weak as I view it as. And the effort to place this in the Constitution, even though we got that through committee, unfortunately failed. And it's very disappointing, this coalition of Democrats and insiders that stop conservative legislation. On the education front, we did get through a charter school expansion bill, but it was severely weakened. It has a moratorium on new charters for 3 years, which is disappointing. We've had some progress on the charter school issue. We've chartered 3 new charter schools in the last year. And so that was sort of a lukewarm fix. I mean, on the back end, after the 3 years elapse, we're going to have a very vibrant method of approving charters, but there's this 3-year moratorium. We also got through a bill that it was weakened as well, but the intent is to prevent boys from participating in girls' sports and vice versa, to stop this outrageous practice we're seeing around the nation and to put a ban on it. And that got weakened as well, but it did ultimately pass and is awaiting action from the governor. But we were not able to pass the ESA bill, which was very disappointing. It was held in the speaker's desk, and that did pass the Senate. And it was very, very disappointing. On the life front, we also had some big victories there. We passed the chemical abortion ban, which that had been brought 3 years in a row. We were able to get that through this time. And then also Representative Rodriguez-Williams, who is just an awesome warrior on the life front, passed a bill to strengthen our case before the Supreme Court, because we had our pro-life trigger go into effect last year, about 30 days after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Obviously, just a huge moment for our country. And then, of course, the other side of this issue, Forum Shops and files a case in state court, in district court, trying to overturn it on state constitutional grounds. The case is absurd, but Representative Rodriguez-Williams' bill strengthens our case there, which will probably be heard by the Supreme Court in the coming year and a half.
And one of those bills you mentioned, I believe, had something to do with school choice. Is that correct? One of the ones the speaker didn't take out of the desk?
Yep, that ESA bill.
Yeah. Why do you think that was? Why do you think the speaker sat on that?
Well, he doesn't agree with it, and that's unfortunate. I certainly wanted to see it through, and that's why it was held.
Let's talk for a second about Wyoming. This day and age, the West is.
Mike, one thing, I apologize for interrupting, but he also did release a column on, and I want to, give his full argument a little bit. I don't agree with it, but he raised some constitutional concerns. I don't agree with we have a Blaine amendment, and there's a whole debate on whether it's allowed with the Blaine amendment, but other states have done it, and they have Blaine amendments as well, and it's passed constitutional scrutiny. So
Gotcha. All right, any other issues you want to talk about legislatively?
Well, yeah, let's move on. We'll keep, there's a couple other things, but I'll bring it into some of the future discussions.
Okay. Well, I was going to take a step back from the 10,000 feet level and say, what do you like most? I mean, I know you've only been in the position for a couple months now, but what do you like most about Secretary of State position?
Well, I love the executive branch being on the boards, the SLIB board, the State Loan and Investment Board, the State Board of Land Commissioners. That's also laid out in our state constitution. And I love being able to interact with these issues continuously. Our citizen legislature, we want to keep it that way, and that's important. But being able to take an issue tee to green, because you're working on it throughout the year on the areas that come through our office, elections, regulations on stockbrokers, broker dealers, the compliance division, being able to take that issue and really get in depth with it and work with the clerks on the elections administration and ensuring that these election integrity measures get through. It's just a tremendous moment being able to get the ban on crossover voting through.
Yeah, I'm sure that
there were many people that said it could never happen. Just like on the voter ID bill, when we kept filing that. I mean, we tried in 2018, we tried in 2019, we tried in 2020, and every year some people come to me and say, we can't get it through. It's just not going to happen. And in 2021, we got it through. It's the same thing on this. This one, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, it kept failing, but we kept working on it, and we had a strategy to bring it through the legislature, and we were successful on it. There's a lot of things that we want to continue working on that we weren't successful on. Talked about the voter ID expansions, banning Zuck bucks and the Soros bucks. This is a huge problem. I just saw a presentation the other day on it. The size of the outside actors trying to come into our elections with bad intent. It's astronomical, and it's a big problem that we've got to address.
No doubt. Let's talk for a second about, you mentioned some of the ones, I think the most important legislative bills that have passed this session. Is there anything you have not mentioned that you think is a big deal for the people of Wyoming?
Well, stopping ranked choice voting was huge. They've been trying to bring that through for some time, and there was some momentum behind the effort, and we got that to be defeated. We worked to defeat that in committee, and it was defeated in committee. So I was happy about that as well. There was a very troubling bill to basically prevent any eyeball examination of a ballot ever. And the implications of this bill, the way it was written, the implications were kind of hidden, but it was a big deal. It was House Bill 6. And it was a committee bill. When something is passed by the committee, it has a lot more momentum in terms of potential for passage. And we were able to stop that one as well.
Nice. Okay. What do you like most about living in Wyoming?
Oh, I just love the people. I love our history. I mean, being in the Capitol, right near where our Constitution was signed, and the Secretary of State publishes the state constitution on behalf of the state of Wyoming. And we just finished publishing that and producing the letter, sort of introducing it, and being so near where our state constitution was signed, literally next door, you get shivers coming in every morning. And it's a tremendous honor to represent my neighbors across the state. It's tremendous.
And if you had to describe in a big picture, the people of Wyoming, how would you do that?
Well, hardworking and industrious, not going to allow anything to stop them from getting the job done. And despite being on the frontier and challenging weather conditions, we get things done here in Wyoming. And that's our tradition and our history. That means a ton to this office. Every day I come in and want to focus on improving everything that comes through this office, whether it's elections. And I get attacked a lot by the media as a conservative, especially on the election integrity front. They do anything and everything to try to prevent conservatives from being successful. And every day I try to come in and use that as fuel to the fire to say, look, we're going to get better every day. We're going to get the job done for the people of Wyoming. It was like, I go back to that, our work defeating that ranked choice voting. I mean, that effort would totally revamp our election systems in a negative way. The implications in states that have done this, like Alaska, New York City does it. They can't even count their ballots properly. The enormous confusion, individuals not filling out the ballots completely, which is called ballot exhaustion. I mean, we took that problem of defeating this effort, which would be a huge negative for our state, and we took it head on in our office and got to the finish line. And that's what I want to do day by day, just continue to have that excitement, that industriousness, and represent my neighbors and the people of Wyoming.
Awesome. And is there anything you want to add that I haven't asked you about?
Well, I just want to thank you for this opportunity, and it's I love representing my neighbors. And anytime anybody wants to give me a call, my number's 251-1372. That's my cell. And if you're coming through Cheyenne, call me and would love to sit down with you.
All right, Chuck Gray, Secretary of State for Wyoming. Thank you so much for taking the time for joining us for Eye on the Issues.